What's going on, guys? It's the Unhinged Engineer here. Today I'm back with a very practical video about how to read a job rec. Now, I talk a lot on this channel about hunting for the right job and tailoring our resumes and all the other circumstantial stuff that goes into a job application, but I've never actually discussed how to properly read the requisition for the jobs that we're going to be applying to. This isn't going to be rocket science, this video, but I do think it will be helpful to a lot of people if I just go through an example of a job rec and say, hey, if I was applying to this job and I'm reading the rec, what are some things that jump out at me as things I should pay attention to? Maybe traps or open questions or whatever else. There's a lot of weird shenanigans that goes on with job recs. They are pretty simple, but also a little bit more nuanced than people tend to give them credit. And so today I want to talk about how to properly read an engineering job rec. So the next time you're applying to a job, you know what you're getting yourself into. Like I said, I'm the Unhinged Engineer. I make professional development content for other young engineers like myself. And if that's something you're interested in, then this is the channel for you. But let's jump right into it. So I was originally gonna make a big fancy PowerPoint for this, but instead I just thought the most helpful thing I could do is actually go through an example. And I was thinking in my head, what is like the most basic, plain milquetoast example of a job application or job rec that I could pick. And I ultimately stumbled on Microsoft. So we're gonna be looking at the most basic of basic software engineer roles at Microsoft. And so hopefully anything we talk about, just looking at something so general, can actually translate to some of the more specific jobs you're actually gonna look at. So just kind of soaking it in, I'm looking back at my monitor here. A couple things to point out. For one, this is a rec for a software engineer or senior software engineer, meaning that the recruiter or the hiring manager, whoever, couldn't actually decide on what specific level they're trying to hire someone at. Usually, even if they do make a decision like that, they like to leave their options a little bit open for negotiations and salary and whatnot. But we're looking at a software engineer or senior software engineer role. Spoiler alert for later in the deck, that's an IC3 or IC4 level position, but we'll get to that when I start looking at compensation. A couple other things. Microsoft, because they're on the AI wave, has a bunch of upload your resume and get it scanned by AI or whatever. I tend to avoid things like this because honestly, in my experience, they're just trying to sucker you into getting your resume in the database somewhere, and then they're gonna apply to whatever jobs they want. So I avoid these when I'm not actively looking for a role or my resume is not polished enough that I'm ready to present it to a company that I'm actually interested in. If I'm actually interested in Microsoft, then I want to give them the best version of my resume. And by the way, just to be explicit, I'm referring to this upload your resume button, and there's actually another one behind my head here where it says use AI to see how well you match. A lot of these are just like, hey, give us your resume and we'll apply stuff for you, but I tend to avoid those where possible. A couple other things. This number right here is typically called a rec number. That's the ID number for your application that they're gonna be using internally. So when they're communicating back and forth, this is the number they're gonna use. Apparently Microsoft is doing 3 days a week, at least for this role. That's cool. Travel, less than 25%. I have never seen a company actually put less than 25%. I don't really know why. I guess they don't want to tell someone they're literally never going to have to travel, and then someday they might actually need them to travel for 20 minutes and the person's going to get annoyed. But less than 20% or 25% to me just says this isn't a role with a lot of travel involved. Software engineering, straightforward. Individual contributor, so big companies like Microsoft tend to have development tracks. There's like an IC track, there's a manager track, there's other ones, but this is just saying you're on the individual contributor track, and that matters more when you start worrying about money and leveling and all that stuff, but just something to point out. Okay, so now we're looking at the real job rec here. So just to read the overview briefly, this is a commercial engineering and AI team bringing together AI engineering with other buzzwords that drive shareholder value, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. This is a pretty plain role, so I don't actually know what this organization does, and their overview is not very descriptive. I feel like these overviews are kind of hit and miss. You know, certain companies will want to be more or less forthcoming about what certain teams do, or what certain jobs are for. There's also a security component to that if you're working in aerospace or defense. Overviews are sometimes hit or miss. I think it's good to read them, and it's good to try to get a general vibe. But to me, honestly, the most information is gonna come from the responsibilities and the qualifications that we're gonna get to. So give the overview a read, but if it's not the most conclusive, I don't necessarily consider that a red flag because it's just pretty standard. Sometimes it's ambiguous like this one, and other times it is actually pretty informative. But enough of that shareholder value driving buzzword crap. Let's get on to the responsibilities. One thing to note about this responsibilities piece here, they're already calling out tools, which is interesting. That kind of tells you something about the role. If you're really going to be working on infrastructure or on established products, maybe doing maintenance or deployments, then they're probably going to be very forthcoming with the actual tools you're going to be using, versus if you're doing something a little bit more heady, a little bit more knowledge or analytical based, and they're more interested in what knowledge base you have, what experiences you have, they might lean towards that. So they might say something like experience with cloud computing architecture, or experience with GPU performance optimization and network traffic modeling. Like, it'll be something more about the actual skills you need rather than the tools, which I'm sure they have in this job rec. I'm getting ahead of myself, but just something to note. Like, I do tend to pick up on whether the responsibility section is tool specific or a little bit more tool agnostic and knowledge specific, because that does give you a little bit of intel right up front. Let's keep going. I can see that they're really pushing Microsoft tools. I obviously would assume if you're working on Microsoft tools, or you're at least working with Microsoft tools, experience with those tools is going to be valuable to them, right? Because you can kind of hit the ground running much faster. Okay, these are all pretty standard. Mentor junior engineers, promote engineering best practices. In my experience, IC3 is kind of the earliest level that you're going to start to be asked about mentoring other people and coordinating teams and promoting best practices. Anything below that, you're squarely in early career territory. At least at most companies, it changes here and there. But I would say if you're at a higher role, like if it's principal, this section is going to be a lot more beefed out, right? Because they're going to want to really know that you can coordinate people and lead teams and stuff like that. But they do mention it in IC3 for whatever reason. Participate in an on-call rotation. So this is interesting. On-call rotations suck, from what I've heard from friends who have had them before. I've never actually been on call. Just in case you don't know, on-call effectively means that you're on call for a certain amount of time, and if there's any issues with the presumably live services that you work on, then it's your responsibility to pick it up and fix it in a timely manner for the users, right? I've never had to have on-call rotations. I don't tend to work on live execution systems. I'm more on the simulation side and the static analysis side. But people who are running live services, distributed services, microservices, cloud compute, all that stuff's running live. And so if there's a bug, somebody's got to fix it live. And that's what on-call is all about. This was actually, as far as different jobs go, a pretty informative responsibility section. Sometimes responsibility sections are really vague, but then the qualifications section is really beefed out. I kind of find that a red flag, because basically what it says to me is they don't actually know what the hell they're going to use you for, but they just have this arbitrary minimum bar they've set, usually by a recruiter or someone in HR for no reason, and it's not really intelligently mapped to the responsibilities, right? You want the qualifications to be mapped to the responsibilities in a way that makes sense, which hopefully we'll see happen here. I should have mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm reading this live, but yeah, pretty good responsibility section. I think this holds a lot of information and a lot of stuff that we could talk about in an interview. We really want to be casing this for when we actually get to the interview with the recruiter and the hiring manager. We know what they're looking for and what to talk to from our experience pool. Okay, qualifications. So before we get into this section, I'm going to give another PSA here and just say again, even if you don't think you meet every single qualification, please, please, please apply. Obviously, don't take a moonshot you have no chance of getting, but companies give really lengthy qualification sections and a long laundry list of stuff that they're looking for, but they know on the back end that they're not going to be able to meet every single qualification with every single candidate. But a lot of people on the front end don't actually know that. So you don't have to hit every single one of these. It helps if you hit a lot, but nonetheless, if you think you stand a chance, just throw it in there. The worst they can say is no. But let's actually go and read these qualifications. So required / minimum qualifications: bachelor's degree in computer science or related technical field and 2+ years. I don't actually see anything about a master's degree. That's interesting. Usually it'll say in recs like this, say they want 3 to 5 years of experience, they might say something like bachelor's degree in computer science and 3 to 5 years of experience, or master's degrees in computer science, 2 to 3 years or 1 to 2 years or whatever. Usually they're gonna scale it down in some way based on a master's degree or a PhD, because that advanced degree does count as some form of experience because you're doing research and advanced courses and whatnot. So I don't want to just straight penalize people for getting it. Otherwise, nobody ever would. So usually there's some kind of scaling factor. I think I know A master's tends to count for 1 to 2 years of experience. PhD, maybe a bit more, like 2 to 3, but don't quote me on those numbers. I'd have to go and actually get good data on it. But point is, these degrees are worth some amount of experience usually. I'm curious if Microsoft actually does this conversion on the back end and they just don't have it listed here for some reason, or they really don't care and they just want anybody with a bachelor's. But let's move on. So coding languages, C, C++, C#, Java, JavaScript, or Python. Now, if you're reading that and that looks like a lot of different languages, that's because it is. Also, this spans a pretty wide array of stuff. You've got C and C++, which are more low level, C#, Java, JavaScript, which are more front-end scripting, and then Python, which is a very object-oriented scripting language. In the aerospace world, it'll say like MATLAB, Python, and C++, which is a little bit less wide of an aperture than something like this. But the point is they're just gonna throw a bunch of languages at the wall and see what sticks. So again, this is one of those things where maybe if you know C, C++, and Python, and maybe like the basics of JavaScript, but you don't know C# or you don't know Java, I wouldn't filter yourself out based on that alone, especially if you meet other qualifications. So yeah, just again, you can see these job recs having really wide qualifications. They're just trying to cast a wide net. But yeah, it even says at the end, or equivalent experience, which is usually the cop out for, or anything else that we didn't know to list on here. Let's keep going now. 3 to 5 years of experience in software engineering, preferably in cloud scale or AI enhanced services. Usually after experience, they're gonna put like experience in what. Sometimes, I find this kind of annoying, but it's become an industry practice. They'll be like 3 to 5 years of experience in software engineering with a minimum of 2 in AI related services or cloud scale services. Sometimes they'll have an additional minimum. Those are kind of annoying to me, but because also like, how do you define that? How do you define, I specifically did 2 years of experience in, you know, cloud scale, right? Because if you work for 4 years and half of your working hours are on cloud scale and half are not, does that count as 4 years of experience or 2 years of experience? In my opinion, it's dumb, but I like this way. This is pretty standard. Years of experience, and then, you know, preferably in some of these things we're explicitly looking for. Repeating the languages here, plus some cloud platforms, pretty standard. Experience designing and consuming REST APIs. Fundamentals in data structures, algorithms, distributed systems, and debugging. To me, anytime I see data structures and algorithms explicitly called out, it screams leak code. I mean, also it's well known that these big tech companies, especially the slower changing ones like Microsoft, are gonna use leak code. So just DSA is an obvious shot across the bow, like, hey, we're gonna need you to do leak code, unfortunately. Experience with AI development tools and frameworks. OpenAI, APIs, transformers, semantic search. Yeah, just AI specific one here I think is interesting. It's interesting that they say development tools and frameworks, but not like PyTorch or TensorFlow. They're more talking about APIs. So this is, to me, saying like, hey, we're not gonna have you actually working on the models themselves. Like my AI experience is more focused on actual model performance optimization and validation of certain algorithms that use neural networks and whatnot. This seems more about actual tooling, which is in line with the rest of the job rec. Just something to call out. Again, this is kind of the lowest level at which they're starting to say like, yo, we need you to be able to communicate and work with people. Usually for the higher level roles, there's like a ton more crap in there about leadership and cross functionality and alignment and whatever, but thankfully it's pretty sparse in this job rec. More cloud. So you can notice a pattern here, like they really want cloud. So when you're looking at your resume, you're looking at your experience, think about integrating cloud into everything you're talking about, or at least most things you're talking about that actually makes sense to tie that into. You don't want to just be shilling the little bit of cloud experience you might have into everything, because then you do take it too far and start to outshine other facets of your experience. But you can clearly tell from the repetition they really want a person with cloud experience, and that's just something to know going into the interview process. Kubernetes, more cloud, more LLMs, right? So there's another one that keeps popping up. And then, yeah, pretty boilerplate stuff towards the end, which is usually how it goes. There's usually a long tail of crap. But yeah, I gotta say, I'm very impressed with this job rec, because I was a little worried that this might not be a good candidate for the video if it's too vague, but this is actually a very well scoped and pretty well articulated job rec, which I appreciate. So it worked out for the video. But the last thing I want to talk about is the comp and leveling piece here. So you can see IC3 and IC4. So if it says software engineer and senior software engineer, and then the 2 levels with pays associated are IC3 and IC4, you can reasonably infer that IC3 is a normal software engineer and IC4 is a senior software engineer. And then they list pay bands. So they give a national spread, which is actually not the norm. I think companies tend to be pretty close to the vest with salary ranges unless they absolutely have to vest it up, which you do in states like California and New York. That's just state law, which is actually helpful for a lot of big tech and a lot of finance and aerospace companies. It's helpful that they have to list a range. But anyway, you can see there's two different ranges. We don't talk about politics in this channel, but it makes sense. If you've ever lived in one of these cities, you understand why there's more than one range. It also says certain roles may be eligible for benefits and other compensation. A lot of companies will say, you know, company X offers competitive equity grants as part of the total compensation package. That basically means they're going to give you stock. I don't think stock packages have the same communication regulations that income does, so they don't usually have to report how much stock they're going to give you. Also, the amount of stock that a tech company like this is going to give you does fluctuate a lot more than the income, because income, it's more of an apples to apples. They got to compete with other companies in their space for good talent, but stock is like all over the place. You know how that goes. I think companies like startups or super hyped private companies like maybe OpenAI will really push the equity. Hey, we're going to give you a ton of stock, and they will. You can go on sites like Blind or on Reddit or whatever else and actually read about typical equity structures there. But yeah, this is just something to note. Think for yourself about where you want to fall in here. Whether or not you can negotiate level, that's a whole complicated topic that there's much more qualified people to talk about than me. But point is, there's pay bands. You can negotiate salary within those pay bands. And this rec is for one of two pay bands, either IC3 or IC4. That's basically what this piece of the job rec communicates. Okay, well, I hope this example case was helpful for you. This was one of my lower production, more live videos as opposed to my already low production normal videos. But I just wanted to kind of show like, hey, if you're looking at a job rec, what are some things that jump out at me as an experienced person who's applied to a lot of jobs and has also spent a lot of time doom scrolling LinkedIn because they're bored. But as a person who's read a lot of job recs and kind of understands how this works, what are some things that jump out at me so that the next time you're applying to a job, you're not as overwhelmed? And I just thought the best way to actually communicate that was to actually do it rather than make a pretty curated PowerPoint that doesn't actually look like these job recs do. So yeah, I hope it was useful to you. Like I said, I'm the Unhinged Engineer. I make professional development content for other young engineers like myself. And so if you're looking to navigate the crazy engineering and tech world that we live in, not from somebody who did it 20 years ago when it was completely different, but from somebody who's doing it right now like I am, then this is definitely a channel for you. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.